Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bella Gamer, and we're back with another Why This Mech License is Awesome. Today, we're going to be talking about the Metalmark, which is a very interesting mech in a variety of ways. First of all, it's a striker mech, so it's going to have more offensive capabilities, and it's a size 1, so, pretty standard for a lot of striker mechs. Striker mechs tend to be on the size 1 or smaller scale, which, makes a lot of sense. This design is also very interesting. I didn't really notice this before, but it's got hooves. And I also enjoy the multiple arms and the use of bladed weapons. It's a really cool mech. And even though it's kind of designed to be more of an assassin mech, if you actually read the lore here, it's very highly valued as like a standard like Smith Shimano style of like military mech, which is actually really scary considering what this mech can do. So let's get into it. So as we look at the stats here, it actually is a surprisingly sturdy mech with having 1 armor, which is the average, and 8 HP, which again is the average, but rarely done together. Mechs either have 1 armor and like 6 HP or like 10 HP and no armor, somewhere in those lines. So it's actually a pretty sturdy mech, standardly speaking. Now, its evasion is higher than average, having 10, meaning putting points in your agility is actually going to be a good idea on this mech. But uncharacteristically, its E defense is low for a Smith Shimano mech. Most Smith Shimano style mechs have typically a better E defense, which I find to be very interesting. But this one actually doesn't, making it more in line to something like NPS Northstar or Harrison Armory. Something to keep in mind, you're definitely going to want some kind of safeguards if the enemies have some hacking potential. Now, its heat capacity is on the low end of average, but it's still average, and its sensor range is average. No bonus to tech attack, and its rare capacity is on the low end of average. Not as bad as some other mechs, but something you need to be careful of. Its save target is really good, and its speed is on the fast end with a below average system points. Now, looking at this base stat, it's very interesting because this doesn't really scream a mech that is designed to be more assassin-like, but as we'll look into some of its other abilities in the rest of the license, it's a very interesting case. So moving on here to the frame traits, they both are pretty much orientated towards this mech being out of or being in cover, hiding, or the like. So first we have Flash Cloak, which means that while the Metalmark is moving, it is invisible, but it reappears when stationary. This is mostly used for things like engagement or getting out of combat. This is a really good ability because if you didn't know, when you're invisible, well, actually, you know what? Let me pull up the stat. So as you can see right up here, invisible makes it so that all attacks, regardless of type, have a 50% chance to outright miss the mech before any attack roll is made. So you either roll dice or you flip a coin, whatever. It's 50-50. It's easy enough to set up. And additionally, invisible characters can always hide even without cover. Now that part is not super relevant to this particular frame trait because again, you're only invisible while moving. But let's go ahead and take a look at hidden because it's going to come up a little bit later. So hidden characters can't be targeted by hostile attacks or actions and don't cause engagement. That's a really big part. And enemies only know their approximate location. Attacking, forcing saves, taking reactions, using boosts, and losing cover all remove hidden after they resolve. Characters can find hidden characters with the search action. So one important part about hidden here that I really want to bring mention to is it only states attacks, forcing an enemy to make a save or anyone to make a save, taking any kind of reactions, or boosting. This does not have move in there. So you can cloak and move if that's something you're capable of. That's going to be very important when talking about the license. So back to the Metalmark here, we also have Carapace Adaptation, and it's whenever the Metalmark is in soft cover, range attacks receive +2 difficulty instead of +1. This makes it so that you want to use smoke cover, all kinds of stuff, which is very interesting because that's actually not very well found in this license. So you need to kind of go outside the license to find ways to give yourself soft cover, but this does make you an amazing ally to a larger, tank style defender mech. As something that's important to mention as well, that if you are smaller than like a guardian mech, for instance, and their positioning would obscure you to the enemy, even if you're not adjacent to them, benefiting from hard cover, you actually can get the benefit of soft cover still, as long as they are, reasonably obstructing the view of your mech. Especially if you manage to get a size 3 ally, this is even more apparent. So, Carapace adaptation makes it really good for pairing up with a defender mech, not necessarily being right on them as a good buddy mech, but using them as some kind of cover, even at a distance. This makes it even better for your utilization when it comes to some of the other features we're going to find here in the license. So now let's go ahead and talk about the weapon mounts. We have an Aux mount, a main mount, and a heavy mount. Don't really have too much to say. I would prefer a flex mount over an Aux, and main mount, you all know, is not my favorite type of mount. But regardless, it's actually not a bad setup. I mean, having two Aux weapons, one main weapon, and a heavy weapon, or two Aux weapons and a super heavy weapon, you know, it are very viable options. There's really a lot of different loadouts you can use with this, which I think is really good. The only problem with the Aux mount is you can't have two main weapons on this one, though technically you can with the heavy mount. You just have to essentially not get the full benefit of the mount. Not necessarily an issue, but still something that I find to be very beneficial for the sake of this mech. And honestly, of the many mechs we've looked at up until this point, having a full roster of mounts is actually pretty good, as a lot of mechs sacrifice mounts for some of their other features. Meaning that this mech has a variety of ways it can be played as a striker mech, which is honestly one of its strengths. Now, its core bonus here is the tactical cloak that you can see here, and I don't actually have to hide myself because its active is very easy. You're just invisible for the rest of the scene. This is insanely good. This is a very beneficial power. And like at best, you're always going to have a 50-50 chance of not taking damage when anything targets you. Or that, and then at worst, that's the benefit. And at best, you can hide anytime you want and sneak into the back line, and most mechs are not going to be able to really do anything to stop you. That's insanely good, insanely powerful, and really makes the Metalmark very much an assassin style mech. It's designed to get into back cover real easy, assassinate a target, and it has really good disengagement tools. Even without activating its core bonus, it still can do this with some of the parts of its license, which we're going to look at right now. So first up, we have the flash charges. It's like many of the deployables in the game, it's either a grenade or a mine. The flash grenade is very interesting because it's not like a typical flashbang where you get this momentary stun. So you throw this grenade up to a range of 5, and until the end of your next turn, it creates a blast 3 zone of blinding light and sparks. Any characters within the area other than you are at least partially in the area. They can't draw a line of sight out of the area. And characters can then just move out of the area or avoid it. So essentially the flash grenade, rather than being a stun, which is what you would typically think of a flashbang, is more like a zoning tool. As well, I mean, it's definitely good, and one of the biggest benefits is you can use a flash grenade as a quick action, and it doesn't affect you. You can drop it at your feet, you can blind someone, and then you can attempt to move out of range. This is really good for enemies that have a long reach for a melee weapon, that have a pretty decent size threat range. You can just drop this at their feet. They're blind, they can't do anything outside the area, and then, you can move. And you can drop this onto a ranged enemy that might have some kind of overwatch to then avoid taking their overwatch. So that being the case, the flash mine, I think, is actually a bit more interesting. So the flash mine here is a mine you set down. It creates a burst 1 area when it activates, whenever a character gets proximity, and a character within the affected area must make an agility save, or they will only have line of sight to adjacent spaces until the end of their next turn. This is, I think, more of a flashbang, even though it has to be deployed as a mine first. So, it's one of those things that, like, I do see a lot of value in this, but honestly, compared to the rest of the license, it's one of its less interesting aspects. Still, there's a lot of good uses for this, and again, It creates good escape tools. It creates good zoning. There's all kinds of really good uses for this. This is a good pickup on a rank 1 license for a lot of different styles of mech. And like many other types of grenades, this one is limited too. So one of the things with the Metalmark that I feel like you're gonna really want to do is invest not only in your agility to get the best out of not only your high evasion and getting more movement, but getting some engineering to increase your heat capacity and increase your limited systems. And the heat capacity is going to make sense here in a moment. But first, let's talk about the other system here found at rank 1, which is Reactive Weave. And this is a really good 1-point system, though it is one of those things that just to make a bad situation not as bad. So Reactive Weave, what it does is when you brace, you become invisible until the end of your next turn, and you may immediately move spaces equal to your speed. This is really good if you get into a really bad situation diving into the backline. The problem is it requires you to brace, which prevents you from using any further reactions. And in addition, on your next turn, you can only use a quick action and nothing else, which is incredibly rough. So, that being the case, becoming invisible until the end of your next turn is not bad, and you'll benefit from any other further attacks against you. This is a really good get out of jail free card. It's not something you want to proc often, but it's something that when it happens, you prevent yourself from potentially getting a lot of damage. Reactive Weave is a pretty decent system, especially if you don't mind losing everything but a quick action. A hacker mech with this one, for instance, can still do some kind of quick hack on their turn, even if they are, needing to brace, which is a good way to make the best out of a bad situation. Regardless, Reactive Weave for a 1-point system is actually pretty good. And this is like a really decent first rank of a license that's really orientated towards self-preservation. There's a lot of zoning tools that can be found with the flash grenade, sure, but a lot of this is really orientated towards getting out of a bad situation, meaning that this is actually just not a bad 1-rank pickup if you just need these things. Honestly, the Metalmark is really good because if you just want some get out of jail free tools, the 1 point in the rank is all you need to get some really decent ones right out the gate, which is very, very solid. Now, moving on to rank 2, along with the Metalmark, we get the Rail Rifle. Now, it's not a very advanced weapon. It's a line 10 weapon, which is pretty good, means, has some piercing potential, and it does a d6 plus 1 kinetic damage. Really, really good, but it does do 1 heat to yourself. So it's a very good rifle, but it is going to start building up on your heat. Now, this is actually really not bad for the Metalmark, and one of the reasons why I say engineering is something you're going to want to invest in when you're looking at the Metalmark, as it allows you to, 1, have a higher heat capacity, and 2, get more charges from things like Flash Grenade. So that being the case, my recommended build for the Metalmark is investing heavily into agility and engineering as much as you can, maybe getting a little bit of hull to give yourself some extra tankiness, and maybe some system if you have some more systems you want to add. It's a really flexible build. I would say its highest priorities are both engineering and agility, but still, there's a lot of ways you can build a Metalmark, which I think is one of its strengths. Now, the rail rifle itself is pretty good, but the license also has another weapon at rank 2, which is pretty cool. The shock knife is an auxiliary melee weapon that has a threat rate of one hex range, 1 energy, and 2 burn. Really solid. It also has Throne 5, which is a very good pickup as well. Now, this one also creates heat. Though, with our Ox mount, we can wield 2 of these, and, well, getting a flurry of these are going to be very nasty, as Burn innately just has armor piercing, and energy damage is not a bad mix-up, especially with the kinetic that we get from our rifle. And this fills up 2 of our slots right out the gate. We still have a heavy slot that can be used for another main if we wanted to have 2 rifles, if we want to do a full barrage of rifle rounds, or we have some good, melee options here as well. I really like the shock knife, and the lore, go read the lore on CompCon for this. It's really funny. each shock knife is made by like a specific individual that stamp it with like their own personal mark. And if you lose it, you need to send an apology letter to get another code for their shock knife, which is just, it's very Smith Shimano. It's a very fun like lore bit that I absolutely love about the shock knife. All right, we're about to get into the rank 3 stuff that you pick up on the license. But before we get into that, like always, if you enjoy this kind of content, please at least leave a like. And increases the chance that other people on the platform get to see it. And in addition to that, if you like Lancer content or TTRPG content in general, I recommend subscribing. We talk about all kinds of tabletop content here, and this is definitely not a channel you want to miss out on. Other than that, let's go ahead and talk about the Shock Wreath, which is a really cool weapon mod. Weapon mods are always particularly powerful in the game. A lot of them do some very great things, and this one is no different. Now, it is a 2-point system, which is pretty standard for a lot of weapon mounts or weapon mods. And it doesn't just inherently do extra damage. I actually have to shrink my camera here. But what it does do is once per round, you may activate the wreath as a quick action when you hit a character with the weapon this mod is applied to. This is a melee mod only, so in this license, it can really only be applied to the shock knife, which is not a bad thing. And obviously, with an Ox mount, you can skirmish with both of them. You can apply this to one of them, and after you do that skirmish, you can then activate the shock wreath itself. What it does is it makes the enemy take a D6 burn, which is really bad. Burn, if you're unaware, is a type of damage, one that's armor piercing, but at the end of the enemy's turn, they take that damage again if they fail an engineering check. And if they fail the engineering check, they take the damage of their current burn again, and then they'll have to make it at the end of their next turn. Burn also stacks, which is very dangerous, meaning the shock knife, which already innately does 2 burn, also can potentially do an additional D6 burn, meaning enemies that don't have good engineering are just going to get melted in their cockpits, which is very unfortunate for them, but very good for us. So it's a really, really good one. It's definitely worth the additional quick action requirements because, otherwise, like other weapon mods, they typically add damage or accuracy or something like that, which is good and adds damage. But this one doesn't do anything unless you spend a quick action, and you can only do it once in a round. And it requires melee, which for this mech is actually not a bad thing. As I said, the Metalmark actually has pretty decent armor and health. So that being the case, going full melee with the Metalmark is also another very viable build, meaning the Shock Wreath is a really good mod to have in your kit and definitely worth the 3 ranks in the license. Our final system we have here is Active Camouflage. It's a 3-point system, which is very important to make mention of, very expensive, but it is definitely worth it. As a protocol, you just become invisible until you take damage or until the end of your next turn. This is very, very good. A very, very powerful effect. Now, activating this does have a heat 2 to self, so it's not something you want to do on every turn, but regardless of that, it's a very good trick to have in your pocket. Now, it's very funny. It makes sense that it's in the Metalmark because kind of invisibility and reflective weave and all that kind of stuff are in its license, even though its core bonus is just a version of this, only much, much better. Regardless, this is a really good pickup for anyone else. If you're looking for a very solid license to add to your kit when you really don't know what else to do, the Metalmark is really good. You get a very standard mech, or a very standard mech. You get a very good combat mech. It's decently tanky. It's got good offensive capabilities. It can play the role of assassin. It's got good survivability in its first rank of its license. It also comes with some very good additional weapons if you have the heat capacity for it. And getting all 3 ranks is going to give you something like Active Camouflage, which is good on many styles of mechs. And even for non-combat related stuff, being able to turn invisible can help espionage missions as well. So that being the case, I really cannot recommend the Metalmark enough. If you can find space in your kit to add Metalmark to your licenses, I highly, highly recommend it. The Metalmark is a really, really good standard mech. And if you don't know what else to do, if you're playing a rather offensive character, Metalmark is going to be the one. Even if you're playing a hacker character, the Metalmark license is still got some great things to offer you. Maybe not a ton, but it's still even just the first rank with reflective reactive weave and flash charges is something that I feel like a lot of mechs could benefit from. But yeah, that's gonna be it. Sorry, a bit of a long-winded one. I just feel like the Metalmark is really hard to identify what it's for because while it has a lot of assassination style of ability, well, not even abilities, it just can turn invisible, right? Which we associate with assassins. But it's actually a lot more flexible than that. It's a very good standard soldier mech. It's one of the reasons why Smith Shimano uses them as one of their often like main infantry units because they're just really nasty. They're really, really solid mechs. It's not even in my top 5 favorites, but it's definitely going to be something I'm going to consider for future games. And I will make a special mention to James since that you're watching. Look, it's the Monarch. It's the Monarch right here. We're not going to talk about it for about 5 5 more episodes or 4 more episodes maybe. But yeah, next time we come back around to Smith Shimano, we're going to be talking about the Monarch. So I know James, you're going to be very happy about that one. But for the next episode, which should be coming out this Thursday, we're gonna be talking about one of my favorite mechs. I'm a very big tanky boy. I love my tanky mechs, but the Hydra is one I have a very big soft spot for. If you like drones, if you like a mech that, let's just take a look at the picture here. Let's just take a look at this picture here. I have to. It's such a cool mech. It's a dismantleable mech that can just split apart into a lot of different parts and attack in a variety of different ways. This is a really cool mech, and I cannot wait to talk about it. But as I said before, this is going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye.